Okay. See if this works. First try. Maybe. Maybe not. Try again. Accept. There we go.
There we go.
I'm not sure what it is about IG Live, but it's like at least 2 to 3 tries to get it.
I honestly wasn't even sure how this worked, so I was kind of winging it.
Yeah, all good. How are you doing today?
I am good. I've moved on to decaf at this point, but I'm doing good. How are you?
Yep. Yep. About that time.
About that time, yeah.
Not too bad. Another busy day. Um, had nationals this weekend, so it's like monitoring that a little bit too with the client, all
Oh,
that
yeah.
stuff. So, you know, just humming through it. But we have a great topic. I think it's a good topic.
I think so too. I think especially with how coaching has been taking off and the trajectory it's been headed in, I think it's a good little reminder.
Yeah, so the topic we wanted to talk about was kind of rethinking the process or sequence in which we coach in. So I think that's maybe the best way to describe it because I'd actually put up a video, I think it was this morning, talking about in a similar light, talking about some of the like arbitrary numbers that we get very focused on, like 10,000 steps and these
Yeah.
calories and these all these things. And so that applies to this topic in that now um, I really think where it turned was there was a point there was a point where people were trying to get away from restriction,
Yep,
right?
definitely.
So the idea was too much restriction was leading to, dysfunction issues or disordered thinking and
Definitely.
disordered eating and like bad relationship with the food and people getting burnt out in the process and so on and so forth. So people got away from like the bro meal plans of old and it it eventually, it kind of started with macros. It was like if it fits your
If it's
macros, which was
macros, yeah.
very, yeah, that was kind of loose because people were inserting a bunch of junk. And then we figured out, well, maybe that's not good. So we can do flexible dieting with better quality foods. And then that eventually came into the functional space in the sense that people were like, well, how flexible can we make this and
Mm-hmm.
and still make it work?
Yep. Yep. I
So
agree.
yeah. So what happened, essentially was now us as coaches have a difficult time managing variables and tracking things and
Yes.
understanding patterns and trends and stuff like that because stuff has gotten too
Too
loose
flexible. Yeah.
sometimes.
No, I completely agree. And it's like, I'm a huge advocate and believer in a balanced lifestyle. And, obviously, as a lifestyle coach for anybody who comes to me who's not trying to compete, that is something that I do find to be very beneficial. And at the same time, I do find it to be less effective and efficient to give somebody too much wiggle room in protocols, especially when they're brand new. Like if you've never heard of macros or you've never done anything like this before or worked with a coach before, to give someone too much wiggle room is almost setting them up for a harder time being successful.
Yeah, so it's like, so how do we determine this? I think there's a few examples we can use of, I think you and I had talked on that last mentorship call about intuitive eating. I use that example of intuitive eating. So for those of you that don't know, intuitive eating is just that. Like you eat based on hunger cues and habitual things and, you know, eyeing portions and stuff like that. But could you really effectively, intuitively eat to reach a high level goal or even an intermediate level goal if you've never tracked anything before? And the answer is probably not. I mean, there's definitely people that if they came off the street and they were eating fast food 3 times a day and they switched to not fast food, that would probably be pretty effective,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. And then it's more often than not, that's usually not the case of the people
Right.
that you're working
That would
with.
be nice.
That would be wonderful. That's what I thought I
Easy to
was getting
fix.
into when it came to coaching, and
Yeah.
that is not the case. And especially if you have somebody, that's talking about a healthy person who just has never had the opportunity to be educated on nutrition before.
Yeah.
But if we get into the realm of a functional health athlete, it's like, okay, asking them to intuitively eat when they maybe have skewed hunger signaling or poor digestion or poor hormonal production, like that's just setting them up to feel miserable.
Yeah, and that's in these that I mean that goes even deeper. I mean, there's so many layers to that because even just palatability and what things you're going to gravitate towards in your food selection and stuff like that. I'm sure there's people listening that have experienced that where their digestion is skewed or they're coming out of a really low calorie time period and you gravitate towards things that are palatable or you
Mm-hmm.
over volume eat sometimes, doing elaborate things to increase the volume of your meals, causing GI distress that way. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of there's a lot of pitfalls there. So what we had talked about for us as coaches that makes this difficult is that if we do have a case that comes in and there's a lot of moving parts, which there almost always is, it's
Always.
never just one thing. It's very difficult for us to establish any kind of patterns or trends if we have a lot of things moving around. So within plan setup, we kind of came to the conclusion that not all the time, but more often than not, it's almost more beneficial to have more structure
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning and then maybe potentially phase our way out to flexibility, as the process improves.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's important to kind of differentiate the difference between more structure and simply more in their programming, right? Because that's something that we had talked about too, was like, I remember having programs from coaches where it was like, this is what you eat, this is how you train, that's it. That's the entire equation. And now with how coaching has progressed, and I think for the most part beneficially, there's a lot more complexity to it. There's a lot of tabs in programming. There's a lot to track. And I do believe that with a lot of those people taking that less is more approach when it comes to just simplifying it and making it more structured is better for somebody when less is like the most anybody has ever had.
Yeah, simplification is the important part here. So structure could come in a lot of forms, right? Structure
Yeah.
could be super elaborate
Yes.
or structure or complex or a lot of variables, but structure could also be very simple.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to kind of figure out where that client's at and what level of complexity or simplicity they need. And more often than not, it's going to lean more towards simplistic than it is
Mm-hmm.
complex because if they are someone that doesn't have much experience, then of course, well, we probably wouldn't want to throw too many variables at that person. And if they are someone that has a lot of experience, a lot of the time they come in and they're doing too much stuff already.
Mm-hmm.
So we almost have to like restart everything. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you need to forget everything you think you know. We need to just restart at the beginning, because what we're trying to accomplish as coaches is we just need this initial period because we have like all these
Yes.
symptoms going all over the place and like all this stuff. And the more experienced clients are trying to give us feedback, but it's so all over the place that I don't care how good of a coach you are, you're not going to be able to digest this and like use it. It's just going to be jumble. It's just going to be like jargon. So for us, even for us, if we can have a first 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever time period that it might take to start with a really simple plan. Now, what does your digestion look like? How do you feel? How is your mood? How is your training? Like, how is your sleep? Let's start assessing these variables because we know nothing else is moving around.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think a big component of that really comes down to the nutrition aspect of things for most people. And I can't even tell you how many times I've had an athlete who I've been working with for 6+ months, and they've done great with their macros. They've gotten to the point where they can handle that bit of flexibility, and then life starts to happen and their life starts to get more complex, and you can feel the stress of this athlete, and now they're not nailing their nutrition, they're not hitting their macros, or it's just all over the place. The amount of times I've had to say, hey, would it actually be less stressful for you if we just put you on a meal plan? And if they don't know the answer, it's, hey, let me take some stress away from you and just put you on a meal plan so that we can eliminate some of the extra mental thought process that's going into this and just rebuild that foundation for you, make it so much less complicated. And it's like the next week or 2 weeks later, everything looks great again.
Yeah. And it can be, and that meal plan can be simple. It could have some variety built into it. It could have a few options. We can kind of determine that based on the client and their preferences and things like that.
Definitely.
And what their goals are, if they have digestive issues, like all of these things, right? But the underlying thing is that now we took away something that was moving around or inconsistent, or they were grabbing for foods that were skewing things. And so now we have this variable locked down.
Yes.
Right. And I totally agree with you. That's the biggest one. 100% is a nutrition piece. So I would say probably the second piece to that would be variable tracking and things of that nature. Trying to decide if we need to track something or not track something, if that's beneficial to the person. And it's normally not too difficult to figure out. I mean, having no data is not helpful.
Right.
But
right.
that is difficult. But at the same time, it's usually pretty easy to see a trend or a pattern week to week. You can almost tell like what pieces of information they're hyperfixated on.
Yes.
And you can change it or eliminate it based on that. It can be a number of things, and it especially now because like you said, we've got so many tabs. So like these it's biofeedback tabs, right? I mean, we can check anything, blood glucose and HRV and heart rate and blood pressure, and it's pretty easy to get obsessed with a glucometer, just like it's easy to get obsessed with a step tracker.
Yep.
Just like you can get hyper fixated on any number of these things because they're quantitative. Like there's a number.
Yep.
So now you're associating a number with an effect or a feeling, usually a negative connotation to a certain number, and you obsess over it. So yeah, I want you to get 8,000 steps, but if it's stressing you out to no end, I probably don't want you to get 8,000 steps. Like we're going to have to do something else. You know?
Exactly. I've definitely pulled some data points from people before as well, because, and then they ask you, okay, well, I thought fasted blood glucose was super important to track. And it's like, well, it can be very beneficial for us, but if it is leading you to be so stressed over it that it is ruining your day, we are defeating the purpose of what we're trying to do here.
Right. I mean, what's the fastest way to raise your blood glucose? Is like obsess over your
Yeah,
blood
blood
glucose.
glucose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same
It
with a
become
scale.
and I mean yeah, anything for that matter. I've even had people go as there's always red flags. There's like normally when there's the stress and then there's like an absorbent amount of data coupled with that, when they come in, I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna have to get rid of some of that stuff, or I've even had people come in with like CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, like wearing
Yeah.
stuff like that. I'm like, oh gosh, no, that's bad. We're not
Uh-huh.
gonna do that. You are not an individual that needs pretty much nobody outside of diabetics type ones need a CGM if you're a bodybuilder. Yes, blood glucose is helpful, but that is just a recipe for absolute neurotic, crazy
Yes.
behavior.
Yes.
I've even had consultation calls where, you know, people are like pacing on the calls, like getting steps, like you got to sit down.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
What are
This
we
is a
doing
problem,
here?
you know? Like this is a problem. Um, so again, any number of data points could be beneficial or harmful depending on the person's connotation towards them. So when the client comes in, I think that the things that we are looking at first and foremost to decide or determine the amount of complexity is um, usually to me is going to be one, their experience. I'm kind of recapping is like their experience, how much experience they've had with tracking and with programming.
Hmm.
Two, the complexity of their issues. And another thing to me is also how many times or have they attempted to already fix these issues? Because now this is starting to happen because this wasn't a
Yes.
problem, this wasn't a problem 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but now you're getting SIBO Coach 4,
Yep.
right? So we're like recycling. We're in this recycling phase where people are it's like, yeah, you have this issue, but you've already done 4 protocols. And I don't really think doing another protocol right now is going to be any more effective than the last 4 that you did until we figure out why the other 4 didn't work.
Exactly. Exactly. And one thing that you have mentioned to me a couple of times in mentorship calls that has been really beneficial for me with my athletes is being able to identify when, especially functional health athletes, but also just your normal healthy lifestyle athlete is getting protocol burnout.
For sure.
Because, right, at that point, okay, you've done 4 SIBO protocols, you're just constantly on some sort of protocol. I don't know how you wouldn't be neurotic about it. I don't know how that's even possible not to be, right? And so, same with lifestyle athletes. Too much of a good thing ends up being a bad thing for them. And so, I think it's really important to also stay flexible in your approach as a coach with your athletes because while something might have been really beneficial for them in the beginning and was what was needed, 6 months down the road, it might not be. And so you have to stay
Yeah,
flexible and open to how the athlete is changing as well.
for sure. And this is not just functional health. I mean, this
No.
absolutely applies to competitor clients as well. I mean,
Yes.
just as much because usually the more you know, the more trouble you can get yourself in.
Yeah.
It's and there's ways that happen. You know too much for your own good, or you're a little too PubMed or Instagram happy, like information seeking and things like that. Like that, even that is a variable that we have to address and bring up sometimes. I can again, if you do these enough, you do enough consultations and talk to enough people, you can normally see these things. So this is always stuff that I just am pretty honest with people from the start. And I'm just like, hey, look, these are the problems that I see. I really think this is an obstacle that's holding you back because they might be doing all this stuff right. They might be wearing their blue light blockers and getting sunlight and know how to read their blood work already. You know what I
Yep.
mean? They're like, why am I failing? I'm doing all these things. I'm like, because you are you are just in a constant state of low to moderate grade angst
Yes.
all the time. nonstop. It's
Nonstop.
it's like Chinese water torture. I mean, you're just like dripping on your forehead all the time.
Yeah, a really great question. If you suspect that, I feel like with an athlete, a really great question is asking them, when was the last time that you were able to do a task like cooking dinner or something like that, and you're just there cooking dinner, and you're not thinking about the next thing that you have to do, or your steps, or how much sodium you got in today, or how much water you have left? Like, when was the last time you had a moment like that? And if they can't remember that, that's probably an issue.
Yes, and the thing about people in that do have experience that are pretty routine is they know how to follow a plan. So the problem is not like lack of consistency
Mm-hmm.
at all. The problem is their attitude and their connotation towards that process. So it's like you're going to do this thing and you can think about it all the time, or you're going to do this thing and not think about it that much, and it's still going to do what
Its
it's
job.
supposed to do.
Right.
Right. Something that I've really I like to think I've gotten pretty good at it with myself over the years is really that skill of just letting what I'm doing work in the background. Like I can't honestly think of a time where outside of just eating my meals or I mean, I'm hungry at the same times all the time. I know when I'm
Right.
supposed to eat. I don't I don't really think about my own bodybuilding all that much.
Right. It's just
So,
routine for you now. It's like brushing your teeth. Like, I don't think about brushing my teeth every single day. I just know that it's going to happen at some point at night.
right. And and it probably would be pretty burdensome if you had to think about when you're going to brush your teeth all day.
All day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so you could think, and then you take that neuroticism and you start piling on all these variables, and now you just have this shitstorm of stressors all day long. So that's another consideration if they are that type of person that's coming in where you can't, because in theory the thought would be, let's take everything away and just like restart. But we both know that if you do that, now we've added the additional stressor of
No plan.
them like pacing around their living room, not knowing what to do with themselves.
Yes.
So there's it's not always a like complete 180 in the process. It does take steps sometimes. You might have to start with one thing and kind of phase your way through this, or you might have to trade those things for something else
Mm-hmm.
that is, it's like coping. It's
Exactly.
essentially it's essentially like trading coping mechanisms. Most people that are pretty, I would say, ultra routine type A personalities have like a lot of addictive
Oh yeah.
tendencies and coping mechanisms that are probably not very healthy necessarily. So it's like, how do we apply that effort towards something else that is going to be more useful? So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I like to ask people, if we are really stuck on that step, like we're really having a hard time like letting go of stuff, is like, give me a couple things that you enjoy that are non-bodybuilding related that aren't deleterious to your health. Like, what did you used to do?
Yeah, what did you like
Let's
doing
just
as
say,
a kid?
right. Besides, or like, what did you do before you started bodybuilding? And if it was bar hopping, that's not going to be a good solution. But let's think of like, there's got to be something
Yeah.
that you enjoy. And then the funny thing to me is always when they, I can give steps as an example because they're very obsessed with the steps. I'm like, okay, well, what is another like form of energy expenditure? Well, I like to play pickup basketball games. I'm like, okay, cool. Into the plan.
Yep.
He's like, I can do that.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Why? Why not?
Why not? Yeah.
Like, why is that? Why is that a problem? So it's always surprising when you tell people they don't have to like live inside this little box
Of
and they can
bodybuilding,
actually,
yeah.
yeah, and do these other things. So I know we've gone in a few different directions, but you can see where there's an argument for for like less flexibility and more flexibility depending on the person and depending on the situation. And I think that is a skill that if you want to be able to work with a lot of people successfully and not have just ridiculously, high turnover with clients, that's a skill that you have to be able to master.
Right. And I think it's important to understand that it is, like you said, we've kind of been back and forth with polarity of more flexibility and less flexibility, but it's dependent, right? So there might be more flexibility in the sense of saying, okay, well, let's remove some of the attachment that you have to the strict protocols and add in something that actually gets you to hit the protocols that's just more fun, and it's removed your mindset from thinking that it has to be this one specific way. So you've said it to me a couple of times, but I forget how you word it, but it's like basically it's positive manipulation, really, is what it is.
Yeah.
Is helping somebody achieve the goal that they're looking to achieve, but in a different way than they are stuck on doing it.
Right. Yeah. There's more than one way to skin a cat, or more than one way to get from point A to B. They both might get you there short term, but they're probably both going to have different long term outcomes. And so once we've kind of done this, so let's say we can think of both scenarios. Once we'll start with the first scenario in which we are starting with more structure, then the ultimate goal there, especially if it's a lifestyle client, would be to include more flexibility as we go. So I think it is also important to preface that before we start, and that this is not a permanent thing. This is why I need you to do this, and this is going to be for a finite amount of time. The better you do it, the less amount of time that you will need to do it, right? And the faster this process is going to go. And then we can ultimately phase you out into flexible dieting or into whatever other form of tracking and more foods and yada, yada, yada. On the other side of it, if you are a lifestyle client with less experience, or you are someone that needs more flexibility at the beginning, you do have to understand that if we are meeting you there and allowing flexibility, each new level of goal will require a new level of compromise, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? I always want to meet people in the middle and make, like, why not get from point A to point B in the path of least resistance?
Yeah.
Duh. Like the easiest, if I can, get from here to here and expend less energy and less stress, I'm certainly going to use that path. But if I want to get to the next point, it's probably going to require me more energy and more effort. So I do feel that sometimes people get this idea, especially based on social media, that you don't have to have structure and you can still accomplish your goal because so-and-so's like, you shouldn't be having to do this tracking and this and this and this, because that is like neurotic behavior and you don't need to do that. Well, just because Sally that's like 21 and has young girl genetics and can do it,
right,
doesn't mean that you're not going to have to make some compromises along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people like to confuse the idea of more flexibility with less effort. And it's just not the case. And if you don't have the foundation to get to the goals that you want, we probably do need more structure in the beginning so that you can learn what that looks like, learn what that feels like, learn how to actually get where you want to go. And then, okay, we can start playing around with more flexibility. Like you said, it's more flexibility does not mean less effort.
Right. And also to that second point that I made, you have to realize that too much flexibility will not get you to a high goal.
Yes. Yes.
Like that's just the reality. And large goals can come in different forms. Wanting to be a national level or pro level competitor is a large goal, but also needing to fix a really complex issue is a large goal. Like that can that can also require a high degree of effort, right? And a high
Yeah.
degree of planning to accomplish. Maybe not right at the beginning, but maybe during the second part of that process, it might require that. So you have to understand this, like, you're going to get out of it what you put into it at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Um, and you got yourself here. So, you know, it's like, this is just, and you certainly can't compare. And again, I use social media because there's just so much room for comparison. And that's such a huge issue, is that people talk in absolutes too much, as if like, this is how I did it, so this is probably
Yeah.
how it should go for you. It's like, well, congratulations, but not everyone's going to get there with that same level of effort. It
Right.
doesn't.
Right.
And I tell that, I'll post transformations or talk about clients online and stuff, and another client of mine will reach out to me. I'm like, listen, this is not
Yes.
you. This is not you. This is like
Exactly.
your situation, your genetics and your situation are, even though on paper, by name, they're the same thing, it's going to require you more effort
Yeah.
to accomplish what they accomplish. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, that goes back to the post that you had made this morning about arbitrary numbers, right? And a big one, I think, especially for competitors or anybody comparing themselves to any kind of big physique change, whether it's fat loss or, significant muscle gain or shape change, whatever it is they love to look at the numbers and the calories that somebody is eating and the amount of cardio that somebody is doing. And you cannot compare somebody who has been in the game for 5 years and what their numbers are to what it's going to take you to get where you need to be in, let's say, your first year.
Sure. Yeah. Or any year.
Or any year. Yeah.
Or I hate to break it to you, but I came to terms with that pretty early in my bodybuilding career. It's like, all right, well, I'm not genetically elite. I'm not terrible, but it's like, why do I do this and get less result than someone else doing less? I'm like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, well, I guess this is just how it is.
Exactly. I think the first time that I came to that conclusion with myself, where I really realized like how arbitrary numbers can be and how you shouldn't compare yourself to somebody else's plan or even your own old plans, is on my like
True.
third or fourth reverse, when I just wasn't reversing the same way I had experienced it before. Every time I did a reverse diet after a fat loss phase and I'm increasing calories, I continued to lose weight in the past. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, I continue to get leaner, my food gets higher. And then maybe the third time around, it was like, that wasn't happening for me. And so it's just a waste of your time and mental energy and emotion to get stuck on something as simple as a number.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good like last point we can talk about is um, comparisons within your own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But I I find this a lot in people, especially in women that have had, the typical history of yo-yo dieting and um, maybe long-term birth control use and like
Mm-hmm.
all these things that essentially beat up your hormone profile and your GI and all this stuff. And then the worst one that we have to deal with coaches is, well, my old coach did this and it worked, so why is what you're doing not working? And I'm like, listen, if that worked, you would be doing it.
Yes.
It stopped working. That's why we're here.
Right. When they're
We're
like,
here
can
because
we go
it's
back
not
to the
working
old
anymore.
way? Yeah. Can we go back to the old way? And it's like, didn't you come to me because the old way wasn't working?
Right. That's that's the whole thing. And listen, if you want to try that, that's fine, but I would imagine that you probably already did try that and were frustrated, and that's why we ended up here in the first place.
Yeah.
So whether that's just comparing like an age comparison, I did this at 25 and
Yes.
now I'm 40,
Yeah.
or you've had because stress, all these stressors over time are cumulative, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So if there's no periods of restoration in there, each time you do it without proper restoration period, it's going to get worse. It's going to be less effective, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be more resistance.
Yes.
So, you know, yeah, I realized that you did that when you were 25, that you just ate a salad twice a day and
Right.
lost weight and just walked for 2 hours on the treadmill. Like, I understand,
Right. I
but I'm
believe you.
telling you,
Like, I don't
I
think
don't,
you're
yeah,
lying.
I'm not saying you're lying. I'm just saying that, those things aren't working anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the reasons that you're here in the first place. And I also, yeah, I can starve you. I mean, anyone can do that. You can do that to yourself. You
You
don't
don't
need
need.
me to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but you losing 20 pounds to gain 25 back seems kind of like a waste of time, you know?
Yeah.
So, and even in the data, like the real life data on weight loss, it literally shows that initial weight loss success is pretty high. Like, it's a
Oh yeah.
large percentage of people who are successful losing weight. Weight retention statistics are terrible, and or weight loss retention. And then furthermore, the weight regain, because every single time over the dieting lifestyle, people almost always start fatter and heavier
Yes.
every time they
Yes.
diet. They continue to get worse, and then they do it again, and it's a little bit less effective every time, and they get a little bit fatter every time they start,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then they're just in this perpetual. This is mostly in, I mean, it's in the competitors, but it's mostly in like the lifestyle clients.
Yeah.
And then eventually it just stops working, or it's so difficult and you're so miserable that you can't adhere to it anymore and you need help.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that just circles back to what we were saying when they do get frustrated because, okay, now it might be a longer process. Now it might require you doing something that you've never done before or makes you a little bit more uncomfortable. And that's where people go, okay, well, this worked for me last year or 10 years ago. And it's like, again, you are not the same, you're not in the same body as you were in the past. It doesn't matter how much time has passed in between, you're not in the same body anymore. So we have to take it at face value where you're at right now, and let's take you to somewhere where you have never been instead of focusing on where you were 6 months, 6 years ago.
Yep. 100%. I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think we nailed it all. We were a little all over the place, but I
Yeah,
always
but
enjoy these
they were
conversations.
all good takeaways for sure. Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you having me on. Or having you coming on, I
Thank
guess,
you.
either way. I'll repost it. I'll add you as a collaborator so you can put it on your page. And then I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, I'll see you next week.
All right. Have a good one.
See you, Austin.